everyone, it's Holly and I'm here with a series discussion slash review. I feel weird calling things reviews. And also I'm still filming here because I like looking out my window and sitting in this chair, but then you can see my mess, but it's life. So today we're gonna talk about the Folk of the Air trilogy or series, whatever, by Holly Black. And I happen to own the Barnes & Noble Collector's Edition, or exclusive edition, whatever. So The Cruel Prince, The Wicked King, and Queen of Nothing. Although I actually do like the other editions too. And I just don't know if I like this series quite enough to own duplicate copies. You have probably heard of this series before. It's pretty popular on BookTube, but I will tell you the synopsis of book 1 in case you don't know. Jude was 7 when her parents were murdered, and she and her 2 sisters were stolen away to live in the treacherous High Court of Fairy. 10 years later, Jude wants nothing more than to belong there, despite her mortality. But many of the Fae despise humans, especially Prince Cardan, the youngest and wickedest son of the High King. To win a place at the court, she must defy him and face the consequences. As Jude becomes more deeply embroiled in palace intrigues and deceptions, she discovers her own capacity for trickery and bloodshed. But as betrayal threatens to drown the courts of fairy and violence, Jude will need to risk her life in a dangerous alliance to save her sisters and fairy itself. So this book, from what I have seen, is often pitched with the hate to love romance, which I will say it does have that. However, I don't think that's the best pitch for this, personally. I know it was part of the reason I didn't read this to begin with, and I actually do kind of like an enemies to lovers trope, but I just wasn't into that. I think that people should push and talk more about the other plot points in this series. There's political intrigue, there's really complex family dynamics. Like, Jude is being raised by the fairy who murdered her parents in front of her. Like, that's some tough crap right there. Like, and it provides a ton of tension and is probably my favorite part of the series. There's also a ton of gray morality, which I'm not a huge fan of, but I know is really popular, especially right now in fantasy. And then there's also the romance, but I think all of those other things kind of have a bigger place in the series. I will say, in the end, in relationship to the romance, I actually did like it. I think it developed really well across like all 3 books. I was really hesitant going in, but I grew to believe the romance and liked how it was developed. And like I already said, I really like the family dynamics and the politics. I think that is where this story shines. I liked not knowing who to trust, which this story is told in first person, which I think is a disadvantage, but this is one advantage it has, is like, because you're only in Jude's head, you kind of have to rely on her interpretations of people's actions, and you're just default going to trust the people she trusts because that's how she perceives them. So that like helps with that tension building. And I personally like seeing like political machinations and like court politics and stuff. I just think that that's very interesting in fantasy and the real world. I just like seeing people navigate those and try to figure out what's best. And like, you might think something's best, but you have your own perspective, and so does this other person. You both could be right or wrong. I just find that very interesting. And like I said, Jude's relationship with the man who killed her parents is probably my favorite relationship in the whole series. It is so complex and raw and interesting, and it's very believable to me. And like, it's not just this like cut and dry black and white thing. And I think if a situation like the one Jude is in happened, that this is a very viable way of how a child would react, because she's very young when her parents are murdered. I just found it very interesting. I will say, talking about Jude, I liked her enough. She would make a ton of like impulsive and stupid decisions, and that can be okay sometimes, but in books a lot of times when this happens, it ends up making me not like the character, and it makes me start feeling like you're just trying to do this like plot thing where it's just like, well, the character just makes a stupid decision because I need them to make a stupid decision for the sake of the plot, but then I'm supposed to think that they're really smart, and it can lead to some questionable like character building. I would have preferred additional POVs, or even just not a straight first person. Now, admittedly, I am not a fan of first person narratives. It just generally doesn't work for me. And I think most of the time with fantasy, I really would like multiple POVs, even if it's just two. I think it helps flesh out the world, and it also helps balance a potentially unlikable character, or a character that can be like annoying, so you can kind of get away from them or whatever. I will say a ton of people have issues with the third book. I personally found it very satisfying. I thought that Holly Black did a good job of wrapping things up, but also keeping me guessing and not having things be like a tidy bow. I know a lot of people have commented, basically, if you look at these here, like they're basically all the same length, and I think people are really used to final books in fantasy series being like big honkers, and honestly I don't like that. I think, for me personally, I think it's a sign of poor plotting, potentially. Like, why was your story just small to begin with but then had to be like at the end? Like, it just always gives me pause. So I know people were expecting like a big honker of a book, and I can see how if you were reading The Wicked King and with that ending, maybe you're like, well, we need more book to resolve things. But I think that Holly Black did a really good job of being concise and clear in writing a book this size that was good. And I think in a lot of ways people have become conditioned to large fantasy, and I'm hoping that maybe something like this will show that you don't need that. And I think you can write concise fantasy. Neither is bad, but shorter does not equal bad is what I'm trying to say, you know. So I found it to be a satisfying conclusion. Now, I read these pretty close together because they were all out when I bought them, so maybe I had like a different perception because I wasn't waiting for months. I don't know, but I found it to be very satisfying and very well plotted. I gave all 3 books 4 stars, and I appreciated all of them. I have been kind of lackluster on Holly Black historically, so it made me really happy to enjoy something from her, especially because I like to support my fellow Hollies. Like, we gotta support each other. So, you know. Plus, I also have blue hair. You can barely tell right now because it's like gone, but you know, I have blue hair. So yeah. But I really liked this, and I know she has another book set in the same world. I don't know if it's set like before this, at the same time, whatever. It's a standalone, and I think now I might check that out. Also, I will say I'm not typically a fae romance person. Maybe 2020 is a new year, a new me, because I liked this. I liked Enchantment of Ravens. Maybe the world is changing. I don't know. Where is this video going? I don't know. But those are my thoughts on this series. I'm glad I read them. It was not a mistake to buy this box set impulsively. I'm very grateful for that, if nothing else. But yeah, I liked it. I hope you liked it too if you have read it, and I will see you next time. And the cat's crawling up the chair right now. Bye.